Hey, Rube, what's the weather like back in Philly?
I knew that was coming. I knew you were going to start with that. It's like 12 degrees with a wind chill of minus 40. I got to work today here at the Wells Fargo Center, and I parked, and there was literally a porta potty that had been knocked over on its side, and it was sliding along. It was so windy, it was sliding along the parking lot. So I'm guessing you don't have a lot of sliding porta potties there at the Breakers Luxurious Resort. Dave even puts that in his story, at the Luxurious Breakers Resort in balmy Palm Beach, where it's 80 degrees. This is probably the biggest disparity in temperature between two podcasters in one podcast.
That's probably true. You got to set
cold.
the scene. I mean, you got to set the scene. You got to tell the people exactly what's going on. This is the Eagle Eye Podcast, I should mention, with Reuben Frank. I'm Dave Zangaro. Yeah, I'm down here in Palm Beach for the NFL's owners meetings. It's a fun event. It's like the reward for going to Indianapolis for the Combine. You come down here and it's a nice weather place. It's normally in Florida or Arizona, but this is actually the event that gives the most access to the key decision makers on the record. I mean, we talked to Howie Roseman today, and we'll get into some of his comments. Talk to Nick Sirianni and Jeff Lurie tomorrow. So it's a lot of time with the key decision makers of the franchise.
Yeah, and if it was in Indianapolis, you probably wouldn't even go, right?
Oh, I go there every year too. So that's but so let's go through some. We talked to Howie Roseman for about 18 minutes on the record. This is the first time he's spoken since the start of the league year. So we want to get into some of his comments. This is our first podcast since the Kyzir White signing. And I know people wanted us to do an emergency pod. We didn't do one on the weekend, so we apologize for that. But we'll talk about what that signing means for the Eagles going forward. And then we'll strategically try to talk about number 11 because I had a chance to talk to Frank Reich about him today since that separation a few weeks ago. But let's start with Howie, Rube. It was our first chance to talk to him. It's been a pretty quiet offseason for him in free agency. They've signed just 3 guys from outside. I mean, they signed Hassan Reddick, Kyzir White, and Zach Pascal. And, I mean, the Reddick one is certainly a splash, but overall it's not as loud an offseason as we've had from Howie in the past.
Yeah, and I think that's somewhat to be expected. And I think Howie – I wrote a column about that this morning, and Howie must have read my column before he spoke to you guys because he pretty much basically quoted from it. He'll never admit to it, but I think it makes sense considering where they are in the draft, and I think he talked about that a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, that was the one thing that really stood out to me and it's because when we talk about this too, and for the most part, I think it is accurate that you fill holes in free agency so that way you don't have to fill them in the draft. But his point was we don't want to overspend, and I'm paraphrasing here, obviously. We don't want to overspend on a veteran just to plug a hole because then we might be keeping a young rookie off the field. And if you have all these picks and they have 3 in the first round in the top 20 and they have 5 in the top 83, I mean, they have a ton of picks here. So his point was that they don't want to have forced redshirt years for guys because they panicked during free agency.
Yeah, and it really does make sense. And I get that fans are frustrated. They want big names. They want big contracts. But, one thing about the NFL that'll never change is you build first through the draft. I just think that's an unchanging, no matter how much the game changes, no matter how much trends change. And there's always going to be teams that win without doing that as their primarily way to build a team. But I think your best chances of building a winning franchise over a number of years is to draft players and draft good players and keep them. And when you have 5 of the first, they're the first team with 5 of the first 83 picks, including 3 first-round picks in 31 years. I mean, it's a real windfall of draft picks and a real chance to replenish the roster. And why would you sign an overpriced free agent at a position where in the second round or the first round, who's going to play at a much cheaper price tag from the get-go? So I understand the restraint. It makes sense. I know it's, you see all these other teams making headlines with big, huge moves and feel left out. But I think in the long run, it really is the smart approach.
Yeah, it probably is. And I mean, it doesn't, they have to hit the picks. It's not like just having them is enough. They have to start drafting a little bit better. But
And they have to hit the free agents too. So, I mean, whichever way you do it, you've got to get the right player. So if you're going to miss, I'd rather have a guy in a rookie contract than a guy in a Stacey Andrews contract.
yeah, and I mean, I think his point too was that some of the contracts for the positions and players they would have been in on were pretty expensive. I mean, I think we know the names at this point. Marcus Williams was one that got $70 million. He's a good player, but is he really to the level of a $70 million contract? Probably not. Christian Kirk, a good receiver, is he worth what, 18 mil a year? No, I mean, he's just not. So within reason, it doesn't like absolve him completely, because I still feel like they have to do more, and I think they will. It's just it's a tough thing because you want to see it early and you want to kind of know what the team's doing. And when you're seeing this lack of off-season movement, you're going like, what are they doing? Are they just like sitting on their hands and they're not going to sign anyone? And his point, and it's a valid one, is that it doesn't, it's not over. Like, and it can't be over because their team's not good enough right now. So reserve judgment until they get there. But if they get there and the team's still what it is now, then I think it is fair to say, well, he didn't do enough.
Yeah, there's no question. There'll be plenty of time. Trust me, there'll be plenty of time to criticize the front office if the Eagles get to opening day and their starting safeties are Marcus Epps and Anthony Harris, and they haven't added a wide receiver and they haven't added defensive line help. I mean, but that's not going to be the case, and it doesn't make sense to. And I think we talked about this a couple of weeks ago. You look at the 2017 offseason, and they added 3 guys when free agency started, and one of them was Chance Warmack. So I mean, like most of the guys who had value came later, and some of them came much later, and a couple of them came once the season started. So it's a constant process. And we go through this every year, and people are always disappointed when they don't make a splash when free agency begins. But, there's a lot of overpaying going on right now. And I'm sure it's not easy to step back and let it all happen. And but the Eagles are always going to have restraint. And when you have 5 of the first 83 picks, you have a lot more room for restraint than other teams.
Yeah, and I don't think they're in like some desperation mode because of those picks. I think they feel like they have a chance this offseason, even if they just stop signing players now, which they're not. I mean, they're going to sign more players, and some of those signings could come after the draft when they're like, all right, now we really have to plug holes. Then I think there's maybe a little bit more, I wouldn't say desperation, but you're running out of options at that point, and you have to get better. So at that point, you look around, and Howie brought up a decent point. I thought that some smart veterans kind of wait. If you're on the market on April 14th, and you're saying the draft's in like a week and a half, 2 weeks, I might as well wait and figure out what landing spot makes the most sense for me based on who they draft. Like if I'm a free agent linebacker and I sign with the team, and then they go out and draft the first round linebacker, it's not great. You might as well wait and figure out how they're going to handle the draft first.
Yeah, and that's what undrafted rookies always say. That if you're an undrafted wide receiver, you thought you were going to get drafted, you're not going to go sign with the team that just drafted 3 wide receivers. They're not going to keep 4 rookies. So, it just makes sense from that standpoint. I think the bottom line is there's no rush. There just isn't a rush. It doesn't make sense to rush into something. And they have such an opportunity to add talent in the draft, and there's no reason to duplicate talent. There's no reason to. By the same token, I don't think, for instance, signing Kyzir White means they're not going to draft a linebacker. You sign a guy to a 1-year contract, you're not going to change your board because of that. But there's a lot of time. There's a lot of good players that are still out there, and more will become available. Guys are going to get cut. Guys are going to get traded. Howie's always active in the trade market too. So a lot of ways to add talent. And if they don't do it, Dave and I promise you guys, Dave and I will be the first people to criticize them if they don't improve the roster. But we have to at least give them the chance.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And the one follow-up question I had to Howie, and I think it's a really valid one, is if you're looking at this and saying, okay, we have a chance in the draft with all these high picks, I think the fear then is that you go into it saying, well, we have to get a safety because they need a safety. We have to get a receiver because they need a receiver. And I think that's a very real fear. And I think that they have to guard against that because you can't – a successful franchise doesn't go into the draft saying, well, we absolutely need a safety. That's how you end up with Marcus Smith. It is because you need that position. You have that pick and you take the next best guy at that position at that pick and you reach for him. The Eagles can't afford to do that. So it's going to take more restraint than at times what we've seen from them in the past. And Howie mentioned specifically about learning from their mistakes. He didn't mention anyone by name, but that was the first one that came to mind to me was that was a clear mistake, and they reached on a player because they needed that position. They can't do that. And I think it does become a little tougher when you're saying the draft is where you want to find some starters. I think that becomes a little tougher.
No, that's a fair point. And I think Howie has spoken about what he learned from that Marcus Smith pick. And, I don't know how much has really changed, but it's funny because like we all do our mock drafts and how do we do mock drafts? Well, they need this, they need this, they need that. That's how we do mock drafts. Well, this team needs a linebacker. This team needs an edge rusher. This team needs a corner. So you give them the best corner, but teams don't really draft that way. And so you're down in Florida. We're getting an emergency weather alert here for a snow squall warning. Be ready.
Let me check my phone. It says,
be ready for Dave's sitting by the ocean, and I get this. Be ready for a sudden drop to near zero visibility and icy roads and heavy snow.
Bad news here, Reuben. We dipped below 80. It's 77 and sunny right now. It's going to be tough. A little windy on Wednesday before I leave. Only a high of 82. I'm struggling here.
I hope your flight's delayed a month.
I do too.
Anyway, yeah. So it's a balancing act. There's no doubt about it. And the fact that free agency is a month before the draft, I mean, kind of changes the equation. But they've added depth at edge. They've added depth at wide receiver. They've added depth at they've re-added depth at safety, and I just think you're not gonna have every position covered going into the draft. But I think by the time we get to late April, I think they'll really have the flexibility to go get the best players who are on the board.
Yeah, and he brought up again a point that he's made before in other years, but the four guys he extended during the season, the 2018 class, and I see both sides of this because I agree with him that those are good moves. I mean, even if they don't all pay off, like he looks at it like they're kind of playing the numbers and they're getting these guys for contracts that they'd probably have to pay more if they let them come close to free agency or hit the market. So I agree with him on that, but it doesn't preclude them from signing free agents. It shouldn't. So while I agree with them that like those are good moves or good signings or good extensions, I don't think it really replaces, like, it can't be the reason you don't sign free agents either.
No, but it could be the reason you don't sign a tight end. I mean, they need a tight end for depth, but if they had never signed Dallas Goedert, they'd be in pretty dire straits right now. They have to go get a tight end. They might have to overspend for one. So it's only a positive to re-sign good players early. The earlier, the better. They get the money earlier, and you get the security of knowing you don't have to worry about a contract negotiation in the offseason.
Yeah, and look, I agree with those moves 100%. I think a few of those guys, if they were on the market right now, would get a lot more. I mean, Jordan Mailata on the open market right now, coming off his Max Singer performance, I mean, we're talking about a ton of money. And even Josh Sweat would get a lot. Dallas Goedert's contract would be huge. So I'm all on board. Even if one of them doesn't work out, say one of them gets injured and the contract ends up blowing up in their face, I'm okay with that risk.
Yeah, they all made sense at the time, no doubt.
But we go through some of the other stuff, how we talked about. To me, that was the most noteworthy. He brought up Jalen Hurts again. I mentioned to you that he doubled down. At this point, it's like quadrupling down on Jalen Hurts. And I think there's some skepticism about how much does he really mean it, because we know they've looked at other options. We know they looked at Deshaun Watson. We know they looked at Russell Wilson. We know that they've at least looked at the quarterbacks in the draft, whether it's real, whether it's a smokescreen. They're doing homework on other quarterbacks. So it seems a little bit like maybe he's talking out of both sides of his mouth, but I really do think they believe in the kid. And to a certain point, like, I don't think it's all in with him for the next 10 years, but I do believe they're committed to him for this year.
All right. And if Malik Willis is on the board when they draft?
Well, if Malik Willis is on the board when they draft, something went wrong. Like, if there's a reason at that point.
That's probably true. But I think you're right. If I had to guess, I've been going back and forth on the quarterback thing. I feel pretty confident they're not going to draft a quarterback at this point. I think if they were going to add one, it was going to be a Russell Wilson or a, somebody of that ilk. There's not that many guys of that ilk. So they're always going to go look at these guys. I know they had somebody. They've had somebody at everybody's pro day. So and they're doing their due diligence. But I don't know where you are right now, but I'm at the 2 defensive players and wide receiver if they keep 3 first-round picks in this draft.
Yeah, if I had to pick, and like, I think they're going to trade one of those picks, and that's the thing. Some people were seeing what Howie said about having these draft picks and being able to play rookies. That doesn't mean they're keeping all 3 first-round picks. Even if they trade one of those picks away, they're still going to have a lot of picks in the early rounds.
Yeah, no doubt. What else stuck out from Howie? What's going on over there? It's like,
I don't know. What else stuck out?
What's with those doors behind you? I keep expecting like Haggard to come out of there.
It's a beautiful place here. I'll give a little tour to those on YouTube real quick. It's just, it's gorgeous.
Oh, the Sistine Chapel there.
Yeah,
Dave's doing a podcast from the Sistine Chapel.
Pretty much. Yeah, it's really cool. All right. So we were talking about football or something here?
Yeah, just other Howie things from today that stuck out to you.
Derek Barnett, we had a chance to ask him about that move, and he said what I thought he would say, that they pretty much thought Barnett wasn't going to be here, and free agency didn't go the way Barnett expected. And we've talked about this. We kind of knew the situation. Like, they expected, and Barnett expected, to get paid really well on a big deal. And when it didn't happen, they looked at it and said, well, for the money, whatever it is, we still haven't seen the real money. It made sense for them to bring him back in some sort of a less prominent role. And from the football side of it, makes a ton of sense. I had a chance to ask Howie the follow-up, like, did you guys take into consideration his history in this city? Because it's not good. I almost feel bad for him in a way that he's back here, because it felt like he needed a fresh start, felt like the team needed a fresh start. And Howie's answer was that they view Derek Barnett much differently than the public. And I agree with that. But based on, like, his teammates love him, the people in the building love him. And I think that matters as long as he's insulated enough to not listen to everything else. And it's tough to do that because it's everywhere. There aren't many Derek Barnett fans in Philly.
Yeah, and he knows. He knows how people feel about him. He's alluded to it the few times we've talked to him. But yeah, I think I totally agree. Like, I think the baggage is the one thing. Like, right now, we don't know what Brandon Graham is gonna be able to do once he's back. But if they draft an edge, now Barnett is behind Reddick as far as pass rush. He's behind Sweat. He's behind BG. And he's behind a rookie draft pick. So he's basically replacing Ryan Kerrigan. So he's basically going from the 14th pick in the draft and a huge contract to a real depth piece. And if you look at, you look at what if you look at what he can do as far as hurries and pressures and sacks over his career when he's been healthy, he's a functional depth piece. And if the contract is what we think it is, and it's hard to believe we still don't know how little or how much he got paid. I would think we'll know soon. The longer it goes, the less it is, I think. I think that's clear. But he's kind of it's a different contract and a different role. And we have to kind of, when we define Derek Barnett now, that's what he is. He's a depth piece. And a lot of times guys go from a starter with one team and a big contract to a backup with another team and a small contract. You don't really see it with the same team. No, you don't see a first-round pick go back to the same team with a contract that pays him like a backup, but that's the reality. And as long as that's really what his role is, and the personnel would seem to indicate that, then it's okay. I mean, but yeah, if he had a different name and came from a different team with the exact same resume, be like, oh, that's a good signing. It's a good depth piece. It's just that he's got baggage. He's more penalties and sacks since he's been here. And that's how people think of him. And that's not going to stop.
Yeah. And it's easy. And that's the argument, right? And that's the argument the team will make. That's the argument we've made when we're trying to wrap our heads around why he's here. But he's not a guy from a different team. He's just not. He's a former first-round pick who isn't a bust, but he certainly hasn't won over many fans since he's been here. And he's had flashes, and the flashes in a way make it worse because you're like, he's talented. There's something there. But it also takes kind of a lack of ego from him to become a reserve player, a rotational player after being a first-round pick and a starter. I mean, they made him a starter in year 2, and he played a lot in year 1. I mean, year 1, he was behind Vinny, and he was behind Brandon Graham. And then year 2, Vinny was the backup. They pushed Barnett up to the top. And I remember back then, I mean, it's a little different with Curry because he had been in the league for so long at that point. But he had to kind of swallow his pride when he was kind of pushed to the back burner a little bit. And Barnett's going to have to do that. I think he has that in him. People think that reporters don't like Barnett. He's been pleasant enough. I mean, when every couple years when we talk to him, it's not a personal thing. And I actually think he has the temperament to deal with this kind of demotion and being humbled by the lack of a contract, but it still can't be easy. No,
you're right. And that's why if I was him, I'd want to go anywhere else and just get a fresh start.
Yeah.
It's crazy how, I mean, I thought he was going to get $10 million a year somewhere over 3 or 4 years. It's crazy that teams are overpaying for everybody except Derek Barnett. He's got to be wondering, am I that bad? In his 3 full seasons before last year, he averaged 6 sacks and 18 quarterback hits. He was like 21st in quarterback hits over that 3-year period when he was healthy. So he's not the worst player in the world. If you look at last year, it was awful, but he's 25. You try to rationalize what they're thinking, and they're looking at a guy who does get some pressure and does have some ability, and he's cheap and fills a completely different need than he did the last 5 years. So it's still kind of weird. I can't wait to see the numbers. It's kind of weird because we're kind of assuming it has to be pretty low. But I'm really curious to see exactly what they are. Hopefully we know.
Another guy who didn't get paid very much as a free agent was Kyzir White. And Howie actually mentioned that at the beginning of free agency, they didn't think he'd be a guy they could get. I think they thought he was going to get paid quite a bit more money coming off a really good season. And I almost said San Diego in LA with the Chargers. And I'm assuming he thought so too, because he signed a 1-year deal here for, we've heard reports up to $5 million. We haven't seen the real numbers on that, but if it's up to $5 million, it's less than that. So
3.5, probably something like that.
Yeah, probably something like that. So, I mean, that's a pretty small contract for a guy who, by all accounts, had a really good season last year. And this is our first chance talking about him. To me, the signing makes a ton of sense. It's a good player. And I know people are going to hear he's a converted safety and have flashbacks of Nate Gary, but every converted safety is not the same. And Kyzir White's coming off a really good season. I mean, he was a good player who seemed to do it all there. He's small, but he didn't seem like overwhelmed by the run game or being able to tackle. He's a pretty short tackler. He can cover. He has range. I guess you can look at it and say, well, why weren't there teams willing to pay him on a multi-year deal? And that's a little bit of an eyebrow raiser for me. It's like, all right, well, why was he available for this price and this late into the process? Fair question, but he's a heck of a lot better than what they had.
Yeah, no question. And I think part of the confusion is he's still listed at – now he converted from safety to linebacker in his rookie mini camp in San Diego. And I think it was still San Diego then. He was 218.
LA. That's the crazy thing. These guys coming out of their 4-year deals are all in LA.
Okay. So, but anyway, I mean, I think he's still listed in a few places as 218. Obviously, that's too small to play linebacker, but he's closer to, and we'll talk to him. I assume we'll talk to him at the end of the week or next week or something. But I think he played at like 235 last year, which is still small, but you can play linebacker in the NFL at 235. And everything you read about him, and I didn't see a ton of Chargers games. You saw a few, but people thought he had a Pro Bowl season there. I mean, he's very active. He's really good in coverage. And he's, and he'll play the run too. He'll give you a good effort against the run. People were tweeting to me and saying, why would the Eagles just sign him to a long-term deal? Well, they couldn't and still afford him. I mean, that's the whole thing. So he's betting on himself to have a good year and hit free agency again in a year. And the Eagles are like, well, ideally we'd like to have him for 3 years, but we don't want to pay what he wants for 3 years. So we'll have him for 1 year. Hopefully we can re-sign him if he plays well. But you'd rather have him for 1 year than for no years. So, and a lot of people are like, he's just another Eric Wilson. He's better than Eric Wilson, flat out better player. So I understand the skepticism. They haven't had great luck with linebackers. I mean, it's just reality.
I mean, all the guys on 1-year deals, you go back, is Eric Wilson, Corey Nelson, Paul Warlow, Jatavis Brown. And we never even saw Jatavis. He retired before that season ever happened. But the track record's not great, so I understand the skepticism.
Sure.
On the bright side, it's a pretty low bar to clear. If he makes it past like week 7, it's been a good signing.
Yeah. So to get him at a fairly reasonable price, a really reasonable price for a year, and who knows? I mean, Howie's good at, like, if the kid likes it here, and he just turned 26, I think a couple of days ago. Mm-hmm. He likes it here, and he's playing well. I would think they'd have a pretty decent chance to sign him to a long-term deal, depending on what he's looking for and what the cap is. But rather have him for 1 year than for no years.
Yeah,
he's definitely an upgrade.
He's an upgrade, and I'm curious to see how they use him and what the linebacker personnel groups look like. If it'll be, we know Reddick's a Sam, and it's not really the off-ball position, but how are they going to implement him and TJ Edwards? Is TJ Edwards still an every down player, or will they start to
I don't think so.
Yeah, maybe not. I mean, maybe they switch that up and you have Davion Taylor out there in passing situations along with White. I'm curious to see how they use them. And I thought Brandon Staley had a pretty good plan for Kyzir White last year. And we know Brandon Staley and Jonathan Gannon are very close. So that could kind of be the blueprint for Gannon as he looks at and tries to figure out how exactly to use this guy in his defense.
Yeah, I would be surprised. And I think TJ Edwards is a really high-effort guy who played better than I expected last year, but I still think ideally – what did he play, 86% of the snaps?
Yeah, and really more than that when he was playing. I mean, he was an every down play. I mean, he was in and out of the lineup. But when he was playing, he was – by the end of the year, he wasn't leaving the field. He
was close to 100%. Ideally, I think that number can come down. I think there's things he does well, but I also think he's not a guy who you're making ideal use of him if he's out there all the time. So I think I would guess when all is said and done, if these guys all stay healthy, Kyzir White's going to have the most snaps of the linebackers.
Interesting. I could see that. That would make some sense.
Yeah.
So I'm sitting right now in that corner over there earlier today. We had 3 former Eagles coaches. It was Frank Reich, Doug Peterson, Andy Reid, all in a row. And also I saw Ron Rivera walk. There's a bunch of former Eagles coaches. John Harbaugh was over there. And I feel bad for Frank Reich. I looked at him, and he gave me a look of like, are you really asking me about you-know-who again? But, yeah, I mean, this is this is our first chance to talk to Frank Reich since the Colts traded 11 to the Commanders, and he talked him up. He said great things about him, but it can't be the full story. It just can't be.
Well, yeah, you're saying all these nice things about him. Why'd you trade him?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think Frank probably thinks better of him than the rest of the people in the organization, like even now.
Yeah, but you would think if Frank really wanted him there, you'd think he'd still be there. I think.
Yeah, probably, but he already stuck, as he said himself, he stuck his neck out for him once to get him there. And it was interesting. He started talking about Matt Ryan and all the things that Matt Ryan brings to them. And look, I don't think Matt Ryan at this point of his career is going to take them to where they want to go. But all the things he said, it was like leadership, accuracy, being able to carry a team, all things that 11 hasn't been able to do, at least recently. So I don't think he meant it as a comparison, but I couldn't get over that as he's sitting there talking about Matt Ryan, saying all these things that Carson used to be able to do, but he hasn't done now in a few years.
Yeah, he gets along really well with his teammates. He's a really good natural leader. He doesn't throw interceptions with his left hand down at the goal line at the, with a minute and a half left. Never lost to a 15-point underdog.
Never shot a duck once.
Last day of the season. Frank knows exactly what he's saying. I think he knows exactly what he's saying. It's still hard to believe that they got rid of him so quickly. And again, when we've talked about his numbers were not bad. Won 9 out of 12 games during one stretch, where he was the third ranked quarterback in the league over a 3-month period. Just had, it was terrible the last 2 weeks of the season. It's really, what an off season it's been. So many improbable storylines. I mean, anybody can be traded now. Anybody can retire, come out of retirement, change teams. It's really been crazy. It doesn't matter where you're drafted. It doesn't matter how long you've been with the team. Things are changing. It's really, really interesting.
I ran into Nick Sirianni today. Just chatted with him. He's doing well. Looking forward to chatting with him at the podium on Tuesday morning, early at 7:45 in the morning. But I figured we'd end the podcast. Just things you want to hear from Nick. Are there any questions you have on your mind that we want to get answered tomorrow?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm sure, I know how he would answer Jalen Hurts questions, but the reality is they keep talking him up and doubling down on he's our guy, but it's an off season where they've looked into quarterbacks. How is he going to, how do you expect him to handle that? How do you expect him to deal with it? And, how hard is that for him to keep hearing? Do you have to call him up every time and tell him, look, it's, we're going to talk to this guy. We're going to talk to that guy. I think that would be my main thing for him. What kind of effect do you expect us to have on Jalen?
And another part of that is, Howie today was saying, we haven't wavered in our support of Jalen. It's about getting him what he needs to be successful. Have they done that? They added Zach Pascal, who's like an all right player, but does Nick feel like they have enough on offense to maximize Jalen? You could argue they don't. On the flip side, you could argue, well, they have Devontae, who's going to improve theoretically. They have Quez Watkins, who's going to improve theoretically. They have Dallas Goedert, who's now going into his first full season as the number one tight end. So they have all these pieces that you could say, or maybe the offense would be that much better, but they haven't added anyone who unquestionably makes them better on offense.
Yeah, that's true. If they draft a receiver in the first round, I think they will. I think they will have done that.
I agree with that. Or at least they will have tried. It's not the same as a free agent because there's a free agent. At least you know what the player is in the league. They will have tried.
You know what he was, what he's been. You don't always. I don't know if free agents are any easier to project than draft picks, really. There's just
I disagree with that.
Because so many of them are in that age where they start to decline, and they're in that 27. And Howie likes guys 25 or 26 coming off that first contract, but I think it's tough to tell with free agents. But that's a separate issue. But if
I don't disagrre with the notion that it's tough. I disagree with the notion that it's as tough as the draft.
All right. Well, I'll look it up before the next podcast. But yeah, I do. Obviously, this is a franchise that's had some spectacular misses at wide receiver, like a lot of them. And that's way before Howie too. I mean, this is not a new thing. It goes back to Kenny Jackson, and they wanted Perry Tuttle instead of Mike Quick. I mean, they were disappointed when Perry Tuttle got drafted, a pick before Mike Quick. They're we'll take Mike Quick instead. And Perry Tuttle lasted a year in the league, and Mike Quick's the greatest receiver in Eagles history. Sorry, T.O. T.O. blocked me when I tweeted that.
Sorry, Mac.
Sorry, Mac. And yeah, so it's been it's been a long time, but yeah, if they get a guy who can be what we think he is and what we hope he is at somewhere in the middle of the first round, whether they move to get him or get him at one of their spots that they're already in. If they take a receiver between 10 and 20, I feel like if you have Devontae and that guy and Quez and Pascal, now Pascal's your fourth guy, Jalen's out of the picture. You still have Greg Ward if he's around or whoever on that, but you have four guys there I'm okay with. You have Goddard, and you have some running backs that can catch the ball too. So if they do that, I'll feel like they've done enough for Jalen Hurts. Anything less than that, I feel like they won't.
Anything else you want to hear from Nick tomorrow? I still want to figure out if he's mentioned it before, but just how run heavy they were. And we talked about this being a question for Jeff Lurie too, but is that really sustainable in Nick's eyes? Like, does he want to try to build this team around that idea of that being their identity?
I know what he might say, we're going to do whatever our personnel, or whatever we're good at, but they want to throw the ball. I mean, there's no question they want to throw the ball. I mean, this guy coached Phillip Rivers, and I mean, he said they have to get better in the passing game. I think everyone knows you're just not going to run your way to a Super Bowl, and you can win some games. You can control the clock. I mean, it's good to be able to do it and have it in your back pocket, but you're not gonna win consistently over the long haul against good teams running the ball 45 times for 200 yards. It's not going to happen. So whatever he says, I think that's the answer, but it would be a good question to ask him.
Yeah. Anything else?
I'd want to know, I mean, he wasn't obviously in Indy last year, but what gives you confidence Zach Pascal can get back to where he was? Because really all you need is what he was the 2 years he was with Nick in 18 and 19, or 19 and 20. He didn't play much in 18, but 19 and 20, where both years he was like in the 40s, between 600 and 700 yards receiving, 5 touchdowns, which is what they need. They don't need more than that from him. He's not here to be a 100-catch guy. He catch 45 passes for 650 yards and 5 touchdowns, and that's exactly what they got him for. What happened last year, as from what and what gives you confidence he'll get back to where he was?
Yeah, I like that. Hopefully we get to all that on Tuesday. It'll be fun to talk to him. All right, let's wrap it up.
I have one other thing.
Okay.
I want to just mention Summer of Soul, executive produced by Jeff Lurie, and his film studio won the Academy Award last night for Best Documentary. It was kind of 5 minutes later, all hell broke loose at the Oscars, but with a different Philadelphia native. But Questlove directed it, the first film he ever made. And you saw it, right? Did you see Summer of Soul?
Oh yeah, it was great. Yeah,
it's fabulous. And Jeff Lurie's studio does some really, really good work. It's a studio with a socially conscious attitude, and it's a wonderful film. So go see it. Congratulations to Quest, and who's a Philly guy, and Jeff Lurie, and go see it if you haven't seen it.
Yeah, I saw Jeff walking around here just holding up the award. I would if I ever won one. I think I'd have it on me at all times. All right, if you enjoy the Eagle Eye Podcast, please
make it a chain.
Exactly. Rate and subscribe wherever you get your pods. If you're watching on YouTube, please click the like button and subscribe there as well. That's it for Reuben. I'm Dave. We'll talk to you later in the week.